everyone, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today we are getting very serious, hence why I'm wearing this blazer, but don't worry, I'm wearing a dog t-shirt underneath the blazer. But today we're getting serious because I'm going to be doing one of my favorite videos, and that is my fall reading recommendations video. I have compiled a stack of books which I think are perfect to read during the fall season, full of ambiance, full of intrigue, full of mystery and darkness, aka fantasy. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into the recommendations. So the first book I want to recommend is Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. This is a novel I actually read over the summer, but while I was reading it, I honestly felt like it would be perfect for the fall, particularly because I just felt like this book has so much ambiance and so much like visual presence within the seasons itself. This book doesn't necessarily take place during the fall, it takes place through like all year. So you get fall seasons, but you get winter, spring, summer, all of that. But with that just comes so much sensory like experience, like you're reading it but you're feeling it at the same time, you know what I mean? On top of that, this is a highly entertaining, very dramatic, K-drama inspired YA fantasy story. Basically turns the trope of vampire guy with girl falling in love on its head, because the female in the story is actually the villain, the creature that the boy should stay away from, which I felt like added a lot of interesting dynamics to this narrative as well. This is a Korean folklore inspired fantasy story. It's highly influenced by history, and I just feel like it provided one of the most unique narratives I've really come across in a while. I also feel like the author went all in with its influences. It didn't just kind of like grab a name here, grab a reference there. No, you're deeply seeped into this folklore world, and it's fascinating and super entertaining. I loved every element of it. On top of it, I feel like food is so well written in this story. Every time I came across an eating scene, I immediately became starving, because the author has a way with writing about food and like communal gatherings. It's incredible. But yeah, this is so entertaining, very dramatic, high-flying drama with ambiance and a super unique YA fantasy story, so I feel like it is perfect for the fall. This wouldn't be a fall reading recommendations video if I didn't have at least one Neil Gaiman book in this for you guys to read, and I have Good Omens this time by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. This is a hilarious but very dark and very like satirical story that I also feel like is wonderful for the fall time. Also, the TV series is now done, so you could read this, then marathon that. They're both great and highly entertaining, but this is basically set on the precipice of the end of the world. We follow two characters, an angel and a demon, who've kind of been friends and working together since the beginning of time, beginning of Adam and Eve. They shouldn't be working together and they shouldn't be friends, but here we are, and they're trying to prevent the end of the world from happening. Luckily, someone has misplaced the Antichrist, so they're trying to find him and prevent him from like fully realizing his destiny, if you will. The story is full of all the British humor you would expect. It's honestly ridiculous and so funny. Like, I can't articulate how great the banter and the dialogue is in this story. You have to pay attention though, because it's not like overtly obvious that they're just making fun of everything at all times. But once you kind of catch on, you're like, oh, I see everything as a joke. But this truly is a story that combines the writing talents of two very amazing authors, and due to its kind of dark influence, this sort of end of the world, demons, the devil, the apocalypse, if you will, it does have some great dark atmosphere. I feel like suits the fall season really well, but also kind of levels that off with some humor. So I feel like it's like a great fall read, but also a light and fun fall read at the same time. But you get like, it's like the best of both worlds. The funness of a contemporary romance, just kidding, and the ambiance of a dark fantasy story. So, you know, this book is for everyone. Just so you can have a little more angst in your life, the next book I'm gonna recommend is A Curse So Dark and Lonely. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, which upon hearing that initially, I was like, okay, cliche, overdone. But this is incredibly fresh and interesting, and I feel like really is very self-aware of what it's trying to do, while also being like highly entertaining with great plot stakes and all of that. This is essentially a story of two worlds that collide, because there is this fantastical world where one of our main character is a prince who's cursed, who turns into this beast and terrorizes his kingdom, hence the Beauty and the Beast reference. And then our other main character, Harper, lives in our world, but she is struggling. Her father has left them, their mother is very sick, and herself and her brother are basically kind of running the streets trying to raise enough money to be able to provide for their mother in terms of medication and also just like keep them as safe as possible. At the beginning of the story, Harper is magically transported to this fantastical world, and which provides honestly the best setup for great humor moments, because we have this main character Harper who is spunky, speaking her mind, really strong, also has cerebral palsy, and here she is in this fantastical world, and for a large portion of it she thinks she's like being pranked, but so just seeing her like interact and like not take on like this traditional medieval fantastical setting very seriously, it's just so funny, and this is just ripe for great dialogue moments. And that's kind of what I mean to say this book doesn't take itself so seriously. Like, our main character's not immediately sold into this fantasy world and now wearing gowns and speaking like a lady. She's faking it and using references from like Game of Thrones to try to like get by. That being said, there's also great mystery, great romance, great like combat and adventure. It really combines so many interesting elements and just ultimately ended up being a really fresh take, again, on a very constantly used kind of retelling setting. So love this, and due to its kind of like dark kingdom setting, I feel like it also has some really awesome ambiance, and the season is kind of trapped, so there is some autumnal, that's not a word. There is some autumn feels throughout this story as well, which I feel like makes it perfect. Next book on the list is on here because I really want to reread it this fall, and that is The Girl of Fire and Thorns by Rae Carson. This is an all-time fave of mine. A wonderful, beautiful, perfectly written YA trilogy. Just all around top-notch story, and I feel like I haven't talked about it in a minute, so I wanted to bring it back, put it in a recommendations video to try to get more people to read it, because if you haven't, what are you doing? Read only this from this video. A YA fantasy trilogy that follows our main character, and it just provides one of the most incredible story arcs for a character and for a world. Like, so much time and care was taken in crafting this narrative. Nothing feels rushed. It's wonderfully paced, and it's also so dynamic and finds itself playing outside of the general realms of YA fantasy. I feel like I really feel Rae Carson is challenging a lot of the expectations of a heroine within a YA story with this series, and I love every second of it. This follows our main character, Elsia, and she is the chosen one. She is the youngest daughter to a family, so she's kind of also considered the spare, but she's the chosen one because she was born with a special blessing called the Godstone, which is literally like a jewel in her stomach. At the beginning of the story, she feels she's being kind of bartered off and married off to a faraway, powerful kingdom as a political bargaining chip, because she's not really ruling her own kingdom. So the only use she has to her own kingdom is to be a powerful, like, dowry, to say. She suffers a lot of self-doubt. I would say this does have trigger warnings for binge eating in this as well, but you really see this character kind of come into her own, gain confidence and like self-assurance in her own ability in the world, and it's just so beautiful. Combine that with great politics, great magic, great adventure. This is the perfect trilogy to marathon this fall, you know, with a nice candle, cozy by the fire, into winter. Read this book all the time. It's amazing, okay? Next book I just have to recommend also, because I've just been loving all of his books I've been picking up over the past 6 months, and that is City of Stairs by Robert Jackson Bennett. But this really could be to say, read any book by Robert Jackson Bennett if you haven't already. But I recently marathoned this entire Divine Cities trilogy and loved them all. Each one got better and better. But this is just like a high octane thriller fantasy style novel. I feel like this is a really interesting subcut of the genre because it combines like a geopolitical thriller with like a traditional fantasy setting, creating this hybrid that I personally haven't really seen before. Combining that with long swaths of time, the series probably takes place over like 40 years. You just have a recipe for really complex plot dynamics, because I also appreciate that Robert Jackson Bennett isn't trying to solve huge geopolitical problems and questions due to the falling of an empire, you know, in a book in like a few months. Like, he's taking decades of time to try to work through and tease through some of these big problems that are present in this story. But essentially, this fantasy world is set on 2 stages, if you will. The first is this empire, which was once vast and incredibly powerful, and the reason why they were so powerful is because they could harness the miracles of gods. They basically blessed the land, and these gods have different types of abilities, basically made them like indestructible and super powerful. But what happened was another kingdom, which was kind of colonized by this empire, rose up and killed off the gods. So when this happened, not only did they lose their power structure, they also lost all of those miracles that were literally the basis of their society, which resulted in buildings collapsing, the government collapsing, roads, walls, anything powered by a miracle all of a sudden disappeared, which not only created a huge turning point in this empire's history, but there's so much devastation and like challenges to try to like overcome all of this, which is kind of the setting of this story. And the first one, we follow a kind of a spy agent from the neighboring empire kind of invading one of the cities to try to like prevent some unrest from happening, which explodes and like opens up huge like plots, if you will. It's just so interesting and unique, and I just cannot laud it more than I already have. I love Robert Jackson Bennett so much. He's also from Austin, Texas, shout out. And it's amazing, okay? Next book I'm gonna talk about probably has the most ambiance of all of the books I've mentioned today. It's full of just wonderful brine and darkness and mystery and scariness. That I really truly think this is a great read for fall, and that is House of Salt and Sorrows by Aaron A. Craig. Honestly, I read this recently. I wish I held off until it was colder outside, because I do feel like this was one of the most atmospheric novels I've read this year. This is a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses and basically follows a family who's really rich and powerful within the seaside community. They live in this beautiful manor on the cliffside. Sea is a huge part of their town and their culture. However, many of the townspeople actually think this family is cursed, because at the beginning of the story, already 3 sisters have tragically died, as well as the sister's mother. The story opens at one of the sisters' funerals, and everyone's basically discussing, are we actually cursed? The father then gets remarried, and there's a lot of conflict between the remaining sisters and this new stepmother figure. But on top of that, it's all these girls trying to like cope and grieve with all this loss and still try to kind of live their life. Combining that with some really interesting influences from the 12 Dancing Princesses fairy tale, which I won't spoil if you're not familiar with it, but it really adds a cool element. This book is also honestly scary. There's elements of like ghosts and horror and serious like murder mystery vibes. Combining that with this like dark, briny seaside setting, it's just so good and eerie and dark, and I had trouble reading this at night sometimes because it honestly would scare me. So I just feel like this is a great October, November read. Definitely great vibes. Honestly, would be a great CW show. Just saying. But yes, this would be my last fall recommendation. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I would recommend to read this fall. Let me know down below some books you think would be perfect for a fall read, as I would love to know. And I'll see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye.